I stormed into the ICU with a basket of flowers clutched in my trembling hands, expecting to see my mother smiling weakly at me, maybe complaining about the bland hospital food or asking when I would bring her favorite magazines. Instead, I froze at the door, my body turning to stone as my eyes locked onto the reality in front of me. My mother, Linda, was unconscious, her face covered in bruises that stretched purple and blue across her pale skin, her chest rising and falling only because of the cold machine forcing air into her lungs. Wires, tubes, monitors beeped in a merciless rhythm that sounded less like healing and more like a countdown. She was alone, completely abandoned, her wedding ring still on her finger, a cruel reminder of the man who had promised to protect her but had left her to die. The nurse looked up, pity softening her eyes, and said, "She came in after collapsing at home. No one was with her. She was found hours later." My throat tightened as the weight of those words crashed over me. No one was with her, not her husband, not the man who had sworn before God and the law to stand by her in sickness and in health. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back into a reality I did not want. I pulled it out, and my heart nearly exploded when I saw the glowing screen. My stepfather Tom had just posted an Instagram story, grinning in sunglasses shirt, unbuttoned, a cocktail in each hand, standing on a Hawaiian beach with a younger woman pressed against his side. The caption read, "Finally free." My vision blurred with rage as I stared at his smug face. My mother was fighting for her life alone, beaten, broken, helpless, while the man who had vowed to care for her was laughing thousands of miles away, toasting to his freedom with alcohol and betrayal. In that moment, a fire ignited in my chest, a fury I had never known sharper than grief, hotter than fear. It was the kind of fury that doesn't burn out. It transforms. And I knew then with absolute certainty that I would not let him win. 3 months earlier, I should have seen it coming, the little cracks that widened into this gaping wound, the small signs that my mother was drowning long before her body collapsed. Tom had always been controlling, even in the early years when he pretended to be charming, but back then it was easier to ignore because he wrapped his manipulation in expensive dinners and flashy promises. After my father died, Mom was vulnerable, grieving, desperate for stability, and Tom slid in like a savior, a man who claimed he would take care of her, keep the bills paid, make sure she was never lonely again. At first, I wanted to believe him because seeing my mother laugh again gave me hope, but soon the laughter grew brittle and her eyes lost their shine. He began with words, cutting her down slowly, telling her she was forgetful, that she was lucky. He tolerated her nagging that she should be grateful anyone wanted her at her age. I heard him once call her pathetic when he thought no one else was listening, and the sound of it made my stomach twist. But when I confronted Mom, she just smiled weakly and said, "It's nothing. Claire, just stress." But stress doesn't leave bruises. Stress doesn't make a woman flinch when her husband raises his voice. And stress doesn't explain why Mom stopped visiting me, why phone calls were cut short, why Tom started answering her phone and saying she was too tired to talk. He hated me, always had, because I was the reminder that my mother had a life before him, a daughter who would not bow to his authority. He once looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your mother doesn't need you. She has me. Stay out of our business." The venom in his voice chilled me. I wanted to fight him right then, but Mom grabbed my hand, squeezed it so tight it hurt, and whispered, "Please don't." That word, please, was loaded with fear. It was the sound of a woman trapped in her own home. One night I called, and the line picked up, but no one spoke, just muffled sobs, and then his voice roaring, "You're worthless, Linda. Don't you dare call her again." Then the phone slammed down. My heart raced as I stared at the silent line, knowing what was happening but powerless to intervene. Days later, I saw her at the grocery store, sunglasses on indoors, and when she hugged me, I felt the stiffness in her ribs. When I pressed, she insisted she fell in the garden, but I knew. God, I knew. She avoided my gaze, ashamed, terrified, trapped. And the financial control was worse. Tom made her sign over her pension checks, moved her savings into joint accounts with his name at the top, convinced her it was safer that way. He even made her add him to her health insurance so he could manage her medical decisions. It was classic abuse textbook control, but hearing about it in theory is nothing like watching your own mother shrink into silence under a man's fist and shadow. I begged her to let me help, to go to the police to leave him, but she shook her head with tears in her eyes. "He'll kill me if you try, Claire. Promise me you won't." I didn't promise, because how could I, but I stayed quiet longer than I should have. I told myself she was strong, that maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked, but the truth is, I was scared, too. Scared of him, scared of what he might do. Scared that if I pushed too hard, he would hurt her worse. And so the days passed, the bruises multiplied, her voice grew smaller, and the house that used to be filled with warmth became a prison. Looking back now, I can't believe I didn't tear down the doors, can't believe I waited until she lay in that ICU bed for me to finally unleash the storm that had been building in my chest. The weeks that followed felt like watching a storm build on the horizon clouds, growing darker winds louder, and yet no one willing to admit that the hurricane was already upon us. I visited when I could, slipping past Tom's disapproving glares, sometimes catching only a few minutes alone with my mother before he stormed into the room, demanding to know what we were whispering about. Once, when I hugged her goodbye, I noticed the faint outline of a handprint on her arm, the bruises purple and yellow against her pale skin, and my stomach turned so violently I nearly vomited. She pulled down her sleeve quickly, whispering, "Don't make it worse." Worse, as if what she endured wasn't already unbearable. The tension reached a breaking point one evening when I called just to check in, hoping by some miracle Tom would be out. The phone rang, then suddenly answered with the sound of chaos. I heard her sobbing, begging, "Please, Tom, stop," and his voice thundered like an earthquake shaking the walls. "You think you can run to your daughter? You think she'll save you? You're mine. Linda, do you hear me? Mine." Then came a crash, glass shattering, and the line went dead. My hands shook so badly I could hardly dial 911. But when the operator asked what emergency I wanted to report, I froze. My mother had sworn me to silence, and in that moment I felt like a coward trapped by her fear and my own. When I finally managed to call back, Tom answered, his tone dripping with mockery. "Looking for Mommy." "She's fine. Stay out of it, Claire. Next time I won't be so forgiving." He hung up before I could speak. I sat there in my apartment, tears, streaming rage, boiling nails, digging into my palms until they bled, and I realized that if I didn't find a way to fight smarter, my mother was going to die, and he was going to walk away, smiling. The violence didn't stop at words. Neighbors later told me they heard banging at night, things thrown against walls, muffled screams that chilled them to their bones. But no one dared interfere. Tom had that effect on people. His bulk, his booming voice, his air of menace. He was a predator who wore the mask of a respectable husband in public, always smiling at church, always shaking hands with local businessmen, always boasting about his investments. And yet behind closed doors, he was a monster tearing down my mother's spirit brick by brick. The financial abuse escalated too. He convinced her to cash out part of her retirement savings, saying it was for renovations but no work was ever done. When I confronted her, she looked at the floor and whispered, "He needed it for business. It's temporary. Temporary like the bruises, like the apologies that never came." I tried to visit more often, but Tom began locking the front door, refusing to answer when he knew it was me. Once, after pounding until my fists ached, he finally opened the door, standing there with a cold smile. "She's resting. Don't wake her again." I tried to push past, but his hand slammed against the frame, blocking me. His breath, hot and threatening, as he leaned down to whisper, "You're not welcome here. One day soon, you'll regret meddling in things you don't understand." I left, shaking heart pounding, but that night I promised myself I would not back down. I started documenting everything, every bruise I saw, every message he left every time neighbors mentioned noises. I knew evidence would matter because men like Tom only fall when their lies are stripped bare for the world. And yet, despite my vigilance, despite my fury, I still wasn't ready for the call that came weeks later, the call that shattered what little hope I had that she might escape on her own. The call came on a gray Thursday evening, the kind of day where the clouds hung low and the air felt heavy pressing against my skin like a warning. I was sorting through bills when my phone buzzed with an unknown number and something in my chest tightened before I even answered. A voice on the other end clipped and professional told me my mother had been rushed to the hospital after collapsing at home. The words blurred in my ears and I dropped the envelope in my hands as if it had burned me. I demanded to know what had happened. Was she breathing? Was she conscious? Was she going to live? But the nurse only repeated that she had been brought in with severe injuries and was in critical condition. My legs carried me before my brain caught up, driving through red lights, honking at cars, my pulse pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. When I finally arrived, they led me down sterile hallways to a trauma ward, and that was when I saw the truth I had feared. My mother lay on a gurney, her face grotesquely swollen, one eye shut from the force of a blow, her ribs wrapped in bandages, tubes protruding from her arms. A doctor pulled me aside, his tone clinical but heavy with unspoken judgment. Your mother suffered blunt force trauma, multiple ribs fractured, severe contusions. If she had arrived any later, she might not have survived. My throat closed as the truth sank in. This wasn't just a fall. This was a beating, the kind that leaves a body broken and a soul shattered. I asked the question that gnawed at my bones. Was her husband with her? The doctor looked at me sharply, then shook his head. She was alone. Found by a neighbor hours later. Alone. Always alone when she needed him most. My stomach twisted as rage collided with despair, and I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. If Tom wasn't at the hospital, where was he? The answer lit up my screen before I even searched. His social media was alive with smug updates, each one a dagger in my chest. There he was, grinning on a Hawaiian beach cocktail in hand, a younger woman pressed against his side, both of them bronzed and laughing like royalty in paradise. The caption beneath the image cut me deeper than any blade. Finally free. My vision swam red, my hands clutching the phone so tightly the screen nearly cracked. Free. Free. From what? From my mother's love. From his responsibility. From the life he had promised to share with her. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the sterile hall, but instead I sank into the nearest chair, tears spilling down my cheeks. Every moment of his cruelty replayed in my mind, every bruise I had seen, every plea my mother had whispered, and now she was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, while he toasted to freedom under the Hawaiian sun. The rage inside me solidified sharp and unbreakable. It was no longer just grief or anger. It was resolve. I knew then that this wasn't an accident, wasn't misfortune, wasn't fate. This was a crime, a deliberate pattern of violence and neglect, and I was done watching in silence. Tom thought he had won, thought he had beaten her into submission and disappeared into his fantasy life without consequence. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated me. When I finally gathered the courage to call him, my hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the phone, but I forced myself to press the screen and listen as it rang once, twice, before his voice oozed into my ear, dripping with casual arrogance. "Claire! Darling!" he drawled, the sound of waves crashing faintly in the background. What a surprise! To what do I owe the pleasure? My throat tightened, my fury nearly choking me, but I steadied myself and spat the words out. "Mom is in the hospital, Tom. She's unconscious. She could die." For a moment there was silence, then a laugh cold and cruel echoing through the line. "And she's always been fragile. Maybe this is just nature doing its work. Don't waste your tears, Claire. She was a burden." My vision blurred with rage, and I realized then that he didn't even care enough to pretend. I gripped the phone harder, my voice shaking with fury. "You left her beaten and alone, and now you're drinking cocktails with some whore while she fights for her life." His laughter sharpened, slicing through me. "Be careful, Claire. You don't know what you're getting into. Your mother made her choices. Don't make me remind you where your place is." He hung up, leaving me gasping, but I had something valuable now. I had his voice, his words, his confession of indifference. I replayed the recording 3 times, each time my stomach tightening, but each time my determination hardening. He thought I was weak, just like he thought my mother was weak. He didn't realize that I had been collecting watching documenting. I called my friend Karen, who worked in a legal office, and poured everything out, my voice tumbling over itself as I explained the bruises, the screams, the financial theft, and now this. Karen's silence on the other end was heavy before she finally said, "Claire, you need to go to the police. Tonight." Together we met Officer Daniels, a man with tired eyes and a jaw set like stone who listened without interrupting as I laid the evidence in front of him, photos of bruises, receipts of financial withdrawals, the recording of Tom's laughter while my mother lay unconscious. Daniels rubbed his forehead, muttering, "I've seen men like him before. Slippery. They know how to play the system. But this..." He replayed the recording, his expression hardening. "This is different. You've got leverage. And if he's taken money, there's a trail. He promised to open an investigation, but he warned me it wouldn't be easy. Tom was clever. He said a man who hid his cruelty behind polished manners and fake respectability." I nodded. My fists clenched and whispered, "Then we'll hit him where it hurts." That night, Karen and I dug deeper, pulling bank statements tracing transfers, and what we uncovered turned my blood to ice. Tom had drained nearly $70,000 from my mother's accounts in the past 6 months, money she had meant for her medical care and savings. And worse, hidden among insurance documents, Karen found a new policy, $500,000 in life insurance with Tom listed as the sole beneficiary. The date of the policy made my skin crawl. It had been signed only weeks earlier. My mother's life reduced to a payout. My rage boiled into something new, sharper, clearer. This wasn't neglect. This was premeditated. He was waiting for her to die, planning it, financing it, and ensuring he would walk away richer. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking, and whispered to Karen, "He's not just a monster. He's a murderer waiting for his payday." She looked at me, her face pale but fierce, and said, "Then we make sure he never sees a cent." In that moment, I knew the time for silence had ended. The next time Tom walked into my life, he wouldn't find the scared girl he dismissed. He would find a daughter armed with truth allies and a fury that no cocktail on any beach could ever drown. I barely slept, the weight of the documents pressing against my chest as if they were carved in stone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's bruised face, the rise and fall of the machine, keeping her alive. And then Tom's smug grin, cocktail raised against the Hawaiian sun, captioned, "Finally free." But the more I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just about neglect or even one violent night. It was a pattern, a scheme, an elaborate setup meant to end with my mother's death and Tom's bank account overflowing. Karen helped me access more files, and what she uncovered made my blood run cold. There wasn't just one life insurance policy, there were 3, layered through different companies cleverly disguised in joint paperwork that my mother had probably signed without understanding. Together, they totaled over $1 million, every penny pointing straight into Tom's greedy hands. The date on one of them had been stamped the same week I heard him screaming at her over the phone, calling her worthless. It was as if he had already decided she wouldn't be around much longer. Worse still, Officer Daniels called me the next morning with news that nearly knocked me off my feet. "Claire," he said grimly, "we looked into Tom's history. Did you know his first wife died from what was ruled an accidental fall?" My stomach dropped. A fall. Daniels sighed. Down a staircase. The autopsy showed head trauma, broken ribs, but no signs of anyone else present. Case closed. But now seeing this, I can't ignore the similarities. I clutched the phone so hard, my knuckles whitened. It wasn't just my mother. He had done this before, and he had gotten away with it. That realization hit me like a freight train. Tom wasn't just a cruel husband. He was a predator who had perfected the art of erasing women and walking away wealthier every time. I rushed to the hospital, stood by my mother's bed, and whispered through my tears, "Mom, he's done this before. You weren't his first plan, but I swear you'll be his last." I remembered the way she once confided in me that he had made her sign papers she didn't fully read his hand, pressing hers until she obeyed. "It's just for security, Linda," he would purr. Security for him, not her. Rage burned in my veins as I turned to Karen. "We need more, hard evidence, something that ties him directly to the violence." Karen hesitated, then said, "What about cameras? Did the house have any installed?" At first I thought no, because Tom would never allow surveillance that could expose him. But then I remembered the neighbor across the street had installed a new security system, one of those with motion sensors aimed at the driveway. I ran there the next morning, begged them to check the recordings from the night of my mother's collapse. What we saw turned my stomach. The footage showed Tom dragging my mother back into the house after she tried to run her body frail against his bulk. Later, the same camera caught him shoving her violently near the garage, her head snapping back before she crumpled. He looked around, then calmly walked inside as if nothing had happened. I covered my mouth with both hands, bile rising in my throat. This was it. Proof. Not just bruises, not just suspicion. Cold, undeniable proof. When I showed Officer Daniels, his face hardened like granite. "This is enough to open charges. Assault, domestic violence, attempted homicide. He won't slip through this time." My chest heaved relief mixing with terror. Because if Tom realized what we had, if he sensed even for a moment that the walls were closing in, he would fight back, and I knew from the look in his eyes the last time we spoke that he wouldn't hesitate to hurt me too. But for the first time, the balance shifted. For the first time, I had more than rage, more than grief. I had leverage, and Tom's empire of lies was about to crumble. The day Tom returned from Hawaii was the day I decided he would never walk freely again. I arranged everything with Officer Daniels, with Karen, with my cousin Emma, who had always suspected Tom was dangerous but never had the proof. We gathered in the hospital conference room, the air thick with tension, the video evidence cued on a laptop documents spread across the table like weapons. When the door burst open and Tom strode in, tanned and smirking his Hawaiian shirt, half unbuttoned, sunglasses still perched on his head as if he were strolling into a vacation resort instead of a place where his wife lay fighting for her life, I felt my stomach twist in disgust. He sneered at me, his voice booming. "Where is she? Where is my wife? Don't tell me you think you're in charge here." I stood, my voice steady, though my heart thundered. "You want to see what being in charge looks like, Tom? Sit down." He laughed, a cruel barking sound. "You think you can order me around? You're nothing. Claire, just a meddling little girl who doesn't understand how the world works." I didn't flinch. Instead, I pressed play. The room filled with the grainy footage of Tom dragging my mother, shoving her, her body crumpling. Gasps echoed. Emma covered her mouth in horror. Karen's hands shook with rage, and Officer Daniels' eyes turned into steel. Tom's smirk faltered, his eyes darting to the screen, then to us. This means nothing." She fell. "You can't prove." His own voice cut him off, the recording from my phone playing next, his mocking laughter, his words dripping venom. She was a burden. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Emma stood trembling with fury. "You monster!" She spat, tears streaming down her face. Tom's facade cracked anger, replacing arrogance. He slammed his fist on the table. "You think you can trap me? You think anyone will believe you over me? I've been taking care of her, paying for everything while she withered away. I deserve that money." His voice echoed like a confession, and that was when Officer Daniels rose, his badge glinting. "Thomas Reynolds, you are under arrest for aggravated assault, domestic violence, attempted homicide, and financial fraud." The words sliced the air, final and undeniable. Tom's face, twisted rage exploding as he lunged across the table toward me, but Daniels and another officer who had been waiting outside grabbed him, forcing him down, handcuffs clicking shut as he thrashed. "She ruined me," he roared, spit flying, eyes wild. "That pathetic woman ruined me, and now her brat daughter thinks she can take me down. You'll regret this, Claire." But I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't let him see an ounce of fear. I leaned closer, my voice sharp as a blade. "No, Tom, you ruined yourself. And now the world knows." They dragged him out, his shouts echoing down the sterile hallway until the heavy door slammed and silence settled over us. I looked at the faces around the room, saw the shock, the anger, the relief. Emma sobbed into her hands. Karen squeezed my shoulder, and Officer Daniels nodded solemnly. "You did the right thing. He won't hurt her again. He won't hurt anyone again. For the first time in months, my chest loosened. I walked back to my mother's room, sat beside her fragile form, and whispered, "It's over, Mom. He's gone. You're safe now." Her hand twitched weakly in mine, a tear sliding from the corner of her closed eye, and I knew she had heard me. The trial came faster than I expected, the prosecutors armed with every piece of evidence we had collected: the recordings, the bank statements, the insurance policies, and above all, the video of Tom shoving my mother's fragile body as though she were nothing more than trash in his way. The courtroom was packed, whispers spreading like wildfire as his history was laid bare. The suspicious death of his first wife re-examined the timeline of financial transfers, meticulously dissected. I sat in the front row, my mother in a wheelchair beside me, her face still marked with the scars of his violence, her hand trembling, but her eyes blazing with a strength I had feared she had lost forever. Tom swaggered in at first, trying to project the same arrogance he had always wielded, but it melted quickly as witness after witness dismantled his lies. The neighbor who had found my mother's body testified, describing the horror of seeing her collapsed and broken. The insurance agent confirmed the suspicious policies. Officer Daniels presented the video, the sound of Tom's voice bragging about being free playing loudly in the solemn room. By the time the prosecutor finished, Tom was no longer the man who had strutted through our lives like a king. He was just a criminal caught in the web of his own greed and violence. When the judge delivered the verdict, the air seemed to vibrate. Guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 25 years without parole. The gavel cracked like thunder, sealing his fate, and Tom's face twisted with the realization that the life he had built on cruelty was crumbling into dust. He shouted, cursed, his voice breaking, but no one listened. The bailiffs dragged him away as the courtroom erupted in murmurs of justice served. My mother squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face, and whispered hoarsely, "Thank you." But the truth was, it wasn't just me. It was every neighbor who had spoken, every friend who had believed, every cop who had chosen to act. Tom had thought he could isolate her forever, but in the end, his violence had exposed him to the world. In the weeks that followed, life began to stitch itself back together. Mom moved in with me during her recovery, the bruises fading slowly, the nightmares lingering longer. Sometimes she woke screaming, convinced he was still in the house, and I held her until the trembling passed, whispering that he was gone, that he could never touch her again. It wasn't easy, but every day she grew stronger, reclaiming pieces of herself he had tried to destroy. People in town stopped me in grocery stores and church and parking lots to say they admired what I had done, that my mother was brave, that justice had been served. The local paper ran the headline, "Stepfather jailed for brutal assault while vacationing in Hawaii," and for once the truth was told, without softening the edges. His name became a warning, not a threat. And me, I learned that silence is a weapon abusers count on, that fear is their greatest ally. I promised myself I would never be silent again, not for my mother, not for any woman. Because in the end, justice wasn't just the gavel or the sentence. Justice was my mother breathing freely, laughing again, planting flowers in my backyard as the sun warmed her face. Justice was seeing Tom's empire of control reduced to ashes. And justice was knowing that the man who once thought he was untouchable now woke each morning to the sound of prison bars clanging shut. As I sat with Mom one quiet evening, watching her sip tea with steady hands, I realized the story wasn't just about survival, it was about reclaiming power. He thought he had stripped it from her, from me, but instead he forged it, sharpened it, made it unbreakable. And while he counted the days in his cell, we counted the blessings of freedom, of safety, of family rebuilt. In the end, he lost everything, and we found something far greater than revenge. We found peace. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched you, if it made you angry, or if it reminded you of how important it is to stand up for what's right, I invite you to subscribe so you don't miss more stories where truth defeats lies and justice prevails. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Claire's place watching her mother suffer and her stepfather celebrate? Your voice matters here. Every comment, every story shared helps us build a community where silence no longer protects the guilty. And if you believe justice should always have the last word, Give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it.